I just started a new organization. I'm starting at a new diversity education program. I want to do some white caucus spaces because the organization is very white, and so am I. Okay, like your humor. But I don't want our colleagues of folks of color to feel left out. How do you balance addressing the need for white supremacy, not need for, but dismantling white supremacy, but also creating learning spaces? So I have a colleague, Jennifer Moore, who actually has done significant work developing ways to train facilitators and lead caucus space for folk of color as well as whites. And if you like, you can email me and I can get you connected. Also my book, I don't know if you can see it on the wall back here, the second one, but I'm Not Racist, Tools for Well-Meaning Whites. I really wrote that to support people developing white caucus spaces. So there's a lot of resources in there as well as other ways. I think using it with the book club guide is a way to do a white caucus. But your question really was, how do I focus on whites in our privileged identity and also the resistance from other whites, but also folk of color be like, what's going on? Now, if people of color are not wondering and questioning, that might be data that your organization is not very far along, or it's not safe to question. That might be more accurate. I would always encourage whites that want to do some work around white caucuses that you pull together a mixed race group to have a conversation about what's the current dynamics in this organization, what do we need to move forward? And you might find that there's a lot of other stuff that needs to happen, like equity inclusion councils to analyze policies and practices with a race lens, to get training around racism so that they have a race consciousness while they do it. Just doing a, not just, but doing a survey around the climate and disaggregating by race. So those could be some structural things that also need to happen. Maybe it's focus groups that folks of color might say, we don't want to caucus, but let's do some focus groups to gather some examples of microaggressions and policies, practices, culture, climate dynamics that you then can use in the white caucus, but also let's get those to leaders. But my guess is folks of color will say, oh yeah, we're doing it off-site, but to have something organized that is on work time, you bet. And so running caucuses while you're in an organization adds many dynamics which are challenging. Plus, you deserve to be in the caucus. So unless someone has a lot of experience designing and running them, you may want to think about who could you have as consultants to come in and do it. Again, a train the trainer could be wonderful to have folk of color, multiracial, indigenous, white to learn about caucusing. They do some real time, but they also learn how to do it. They learn facilitation skills, and then they are running it, but they've got support. It's not just, oh, you're a person of color, can you do this? In addition to the 3 other jobs we're giving you to dismantle racism, but only paying you barely for the one you're supposed to be doing here. So I would really think about how to provide training support for all folk. You also probably need to have a business case, a leadership case for why these are critical. I think I write about it some in the book, but you could get onto Google and find out why it's critical. There was an article I just downloaded, just a moment. It's from the Arrow, and the title is Why People of Color Need Spaces Without White People. It's by Kelsey Blackwell. That's probably one of many that you can find. So again, get a group of colleagues who want to have this conversation. Now, if folks of color say, yeah, no thanks, you could ask, would you be willing to kind of serve as a check-in advisory board or group that I can come and have some accountability with to say, here's what I'm thinking of doing with the whites, what do you think? And then find a way to compensate time and energy. And it might be, they might say, you know, it's enough that you're doing it, or they might say, actually, we'd love some resources on X, or what I want to make sure is that folks of color are spending the time and energy to offer advice and input to help you design the white caucus work. So you're not doing it coming in like, I know it, but you're in partnership with folks of color. Make sure their time is acknowledged, appreciated, and compensated. And it could be, you're like, are there community organizations? I could go do workshops for them, right? Something you negotiate. Anybody have any other ideas? Oh, Victoria, thank you. You found it and you popped it into the chat. I want to make sure the leaders know why this is happening, because they may be more excited about whites doing it than folks of color, given the continuing racist dynamics these last 2.5 years, 3 years. More and more folks are going to say, why are they self-segregating? This is undermining our inclusion efforts. And so as white people, we need to be very clear about why caucus spaces, affinity spaces is critical in organizations for folks in marginalized as well as privileged, that it's professional development, it's leadership development. It's also retention, incredibly retention-based. So I hope that was useful. One more thing about affinity spaces. If you're going to NCORE or the White Privilege Conference, actually Jennifer Moore and I will be doing some workshops there about how to create them and dealing with resistance. Strategically anticipate the resistance and be ready for it. Welcome it as opportunities to have conversations. And also, don't scare yourself. So for instance, I wouldn't say, oh, you don't think we should do it? Okay. It'd be like, those are very common. I thought that too. And here's what I've learned. Here's what's happening in other organizations. And really showing the benefit to individuals and the organization for affinity space, especially around culture change, recruitment, and retention.